So the last topic I talk about is the idea of globalization. So what I've shown you locally on small scales certainly happens worldwide. It's referred to as a global village. That is promoted by the free trade, by the infrastructure with planes, by tourism, by subzoning worldwide. And then it relates to access and roads. There are international roads constructions, such as, let's say, the Inter-American Highway that goes from the Fireland up to Alaska. And there are other of these interactions happening as well, including shipping. So worldwide, it's really also ongoing. And so what I just showed you earlier on a smaller scale now happens globally. Here is an example for North America how these road systems look like. That's just the major roads. And these maps exist as GIS maps, so you can actually use them. But when you zoom in further, you will realize here an example for Idaho, how much of other roads are there. And these are just the paved roads. Now you should also consider that there are many roads that are not paved. And so where the roads are not paved, including ATV trails and snowmobile trails, you realize that humans are everywhere. These gray zones, these gray lines show you these trails and other roads and agriculture roads. But you see also the white area there. I don't know if you see the white spots in Idaho. So what happens then in these white areas is usually these are either wetlands or national parks. So in other words, everything what's not protected is used up by roads. And if there is something that's inaccessible, it stays probably less disturbed. So that's an argument in favor of land protection. But you see how serious it is. I mean, here, if you zoom in through the roads of Idaho, you see how much of a structure there is already. And the white areas are just the ones, again, that are inaccessible. So anyway, pretty dramatic footprint. People who think that Alaska would be unaffected by the human footprint should look at this map here. That's a map you get from Google. It's a publicly available map showing all the airports in Alaska. It's dramatic how many airports we have. I think it's over 120 airports that we have in Alaska, with the idea that these airports would support the villages, and obviously they do. But I can also assure you that all the airports will leave a footprint, and they will have invasive species at any of the airports. So when you look at this pattern for Alaska, that's extremely busy, and it puts an interesting spin to the idea of Alaska as a wilderness place. I mean, the human footprint in Alaska is dramatic. And again, that's just a terrestrial. With Arctic shipping and with development of ports, this footprint will obviously increase. So anyway, we talk more about it, but just to give you a perspective. Here is the airline map. The next slide shows you the airline routes, just some of them. Pretty dramatic too, how the connectivity works. So let's say Tokyo in Japan is directly connected with Los Angeles, and that means it's directly connected in terms of viruses, in terms of diseases, in terms of invasive species, in terms of humans. So anyway, pretty dramatic connections there. This is just one airline. If you take all the airlines together, you get a more serious picture. So anyway, just to show you how that all is connected nowadays. Some effects that occur when humans enter a landscape is they will usually change the plant abundance, they change the plant structure, they change the range of plants, they bring in invasive species, they change the nutrients of soil, they change the mosaic of the landscape, they bring impacts based on roads, and they change the watersheds, and that results to ocean decay. There are many examples for this. The Polynesians basically did it already. The Maasai in Africa did very similar things. The Spanish invasion in the Caribbean and Central America, Latin America showed the same. The Europeans, of course, in North America. So anyway, there are worldwide impacts of this type of patterns, general patterns. And here is an indicator of this landscape change. The next slide, where you see the starling. I show you this is an environmental history of the starling, really. The starling was introduced by some Englishmen who really wanted to have the world look everywhere like England. So they took the starling with them, introduced it several times in New York, and from New York in the 20s it finally was, in 1910, 1900, it finally was successful to the degree that now even it's almost reached Alaska now. So starlings will probably, if we haven't seen them yet, they certainly will come there anytime soon, just because that has been the history of the starlings. So there are birds that are indicating how urbanized landscapes are. That's one of these indicator of urbanized landscapes. And you see again historically when the first starlings were seen in, let's say, Mexico, probably in the 80s approximately. There are many other examples of birds that have done the same. Here is the example of house finches. The next slide. When they showed up in landscapes, that usually is an indication of change. In this case, it's a bird that moved more to the west. But then, in the meantime, while habitats got changed, here's actually a very nice map from your textbook, how old-growth forests got lost in the US, which is major habitat alteration, obviously. So in 1620, the green color shows you where we had old-growth forest in North America. And you see it mostly on the East Coast, part to the Midwest. But already in 1850, we lost some of this forest because of overharvest. Specifically, when you look at Maine, when you look at southern Maine, when you look at Jersey, when you look at these states there, and certainly also in the Midwest, the Great Lakes region, I mean, the area was overcut, but that was already in the 1850s. When you look at the map for 1920, which was 100 years ago, almost 90 years ago, you see that almost no old-growth forest left. So in the US, we have really lost old-growth forest, and that's a global phenomenon almost. There's not much old-growth forest left worldwide. So here is old-growth forest 100 years ago, and the only place where it's left when you look at it is inaccessible swamps or mountains, such as Rocky Mountains. And that's the discussion about old-growth forest and change of habitat. In the first lecture, I showed you the distribution of, let's say, grizzly bears. Here's an example how it has changed over time. So in other words, where we find grizzly bears now, it's mostly just retreat areas. It's not where they really want to be. The grizzly bears don't want to be in the Arctic. They really want to be further south. But there's no space for them, so they got pushed out. When you look at the Earth at night, you will agree with me that people are almost everywhere these days. Certainly on the coast. Most people live on the coast. 50% of the human population lives on the coast. That's where we have the biggest footprint. Look at Japan, look at Europe, look at England, look at the East Coast. And then in Alaska, for instance, when you look at the three big hotspots, you see Anchorage, you see Fairbanks, which is on the river at least, not on the coast, but on the river. And then you look up north and you find Prudhoe Bay. These are the three hotspots there, including some others. Some other ports. So anyway, there are some areas left where you have a low human footprint, such as the Arctic and the Antarctic, and the desert, like the Sahara, and part of the Amazonia, and part of the Tibetan Plateau. But other than that, it's pretty dreadful, where you will not find light pollution. Here's a little bit a picture from our own research, where how the European pattern has spread all over the world, and how the European influence has spread in terms of globalization and how it has modified landscapes. And then if you want to have a more quantified view, and these maps exist at GIS, there's a website here where you can get these human impact maps on the biosphere, and it shows you the same picture, human footprint, usually related to roads. So that's when you should look very closely into the European picture, and also in the East Coast and in the Great Lakes area, where you have a lot of disturbance, including southern Canada. So there's massive changes there, certainly in the plains. You look at Alberta, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and so on, and certainly South Dakota and areas like this. A lot of changes have obviously happened there. The same is true for the ocean. So, I mean, don't think it's only affected by land. If you go to the next slide, you see the ocean footprint in orange, and you see that Alaska, for instance, has actually pretty high orange footprint in some areas. The wilderness areas are usually in remote areas where people have no good access to, including Antarctica and some parts of the Russian high Arctic. But everything else heavily used with a human footprint. To bring it home more to the Pacific and to Alaska, you can talk about the Pacific sea otter, let's say. A lot of history there, I'll let you read it, but there has been a very strong hunt and disturbance of the populations in the 17th century for the pelt hunt, mostly for China. Here's a distribution of the historic range and the current range. The sea otter got reintroduced, so the Californian population some of them got restored, some of the Canadians, and some of the Alaskan populations. It's a story in itself, so I'll let you figure that out. But there are also other extinctions, and here's a whole list in the next slide, talk about recent extinctions and population bottlenecks, where we lost species or almost lost them. And so this doesn't happen by itself, it happens with humans. Humans are involved, the human pressure is involved, and usually some of the industrial activities are involved. So anyway, we can talk more about it over time, but just that you have seen a list. And that's all what I want to talk about today. So I'm repeating here, we talked about the types of human-caused changes. We talked about the effects of human footprints. We talked about the history of the human footprint, and then I showed you some examples, almost worldwide. I can probably name you many others, but regardless, these are the four examples the four topics I'd like to talk about today. I'll leave it there. We will talk about science next times, so please save your 2 papers or some scientific ideas that you have or want to share with us for next time. And that's the end for today. I thank you for your attention and looking forward to seeing you next time. Thank you so much. Goodbye.